So, long-awaited, some would say. This is the result of a consultation, which was a fairly controversial consultation. You've been in post since January. To what extent have your views changed on these proposals, or the proposals that were forward, compared to what you're bringing forward now? Have your views changed on some of the aspects that you were quite outspoken about as a backbencher?
Actually, my views haven't changed. In fact, what we're coming forward with is in line with the views that I expressed as a backbencher. I'm happy to say again, I thought what was originally put out to public consultation from my point of view was unacceptable, that we were going to take a hatchet to all the exemptions, that we were going to turn around and say that the age you receive free prescriptions would match with when you got a free TV licence, which I think is one of the most bizarre things I've ever heard said in Tynwald. And that has now all gone.
Now, we'll start with prescription charges. They were probably the most controversial aspect of the consultation, and certainly the one that got the most publicity. They're going up from £3.85 to £5 under these proposals. Is that a fair amount? I mean, I know you've been accused of saying in Tynwald that you wouldn't do that.
I want to put that right. I didn't actually say that in Tynwald. I've seen the news articles that say David Ashford said when he was a backbencher, and also when he became minister, he wouldn't increase prescription charges. What I said in Tynwald was I wasn't willing to proceed with the scheme as was, and this was the scheme of the consultation, which referred to things such as taking, like we've already just mentioned, a hatchet to all the exemptions, to saying you don't get free prescriptions until the age of 75. I pulled the plug on that. That was one of my first acts as ministers. But I've never at any point turned round and said, either in Tynwald, outside of Tynwald or anywhere, that the prescription charges weren't necessarily going to rise. But I think it is a fair amount. Because when you look at what's being charged, for instance, in England, where they're now going to be paying £8.80, and also the fact that we have kept all the exemptions that were there previously in terms of medical conditions. So people with diabetes, people with chronic conditions will still get their prescriptions free. And that is absolutely crucial, because that was something that I was absolutely against in the original consultation, which was the amount of exemptions that were just going to disappear. So 90% of prescriptions that are issued will still remain free.
Although there is always an argument to say that, although you cite England as being significantly higher at £8.80, prescriptions are free in Scotland. So there's a massive difference there.
There is, but of course one thing I should point out about the Scottish model is it's not without controversy. In fact, in 2016, a group of doctors put down a motion to the British Medical Association conference in Scotland calling for an end to free prescriptions, because they said it was basically divesting the Scottish NHS of much needed funding. So it's certainly not without controversy. Wales, of course, also has free prescriptions currently, and there's been queries in political circles about whether it's actually having any benefit. And certainly in terms of the Department of Health here, I think it would be very imprudent. It'd be very popular, I'm sure, if I turned around today and said, we're going to move to free prescriptions. But at a time when budgets are under pressure, I've just gone to Tynwald for a supplementary vote, which was my first act as minister, not the way you want to start, but there we go. And all my colleagues are saying, well, you've got pressures, have you got enough money? It would be absolutely bizarre for me as minister to stand up, no matter how popular it would be, and say, well, what I've decided is my first act of the new financial year is we're going to cut off an income stream to the department. That would be absolutely ludicrous.
With that as the backdrop then, is £5 high enough?
I think £5 is a fair rate. Obviously, I've expressed views in the past that I think longer term we need to move to a proper means tested system, but that still needs to be designed. In the interim, I think £5 is a fair amount, because what you don't want to do is to go too high. And I think that the amount, we've got to keep it affordable for people, particularly in middle income brackets that might not fall into any of the exemptions lists. One other thing I should point out, just in relation to this, because I know there's been a few people on social media I've seen saying, oh, another one of these charges government bumps up every year. Prescription charges, the last time they actually went up was the 1st of September 2010. So it's been 7.5 years since the prescription charge last rose.
But if this is approved by Tynwald, the scheme itself will be reviewed on an annual basis, so you will have the ability to increase charges year on year if you so wish or deem it fit to do so.
There's always been the ability to increase prescription charges year on year. It used to be done via regulations that used to be laid to the floor of Tynwald. But over the last 7.5 years, the decision's been made to leave it at the £3.85. So, and in the future, we'll obviously look at where we want to go, but I think £5 is a fair amount, particularly when you take it in the context that prescription charges have not been affected in any way in the last 7.5 years.
You mentioned the exemptions, and the exemptions that within the consultation would have been removed. You disagreed with the majority of them, and you're not proceeding with those. But there is one change, and that relates to age.
There is. One of the exemptions previously had the age exemption set at 60. The decision's been taken that should be in line with retirement age. In fact, something I said in response in Tynwald when I asked the question about why it was being linked at 75, and I got the answer back saying, well, it's linked at 75 because that's when you get a free TV licence. I made clear at the time in my supplementary question, wouldn't it be a better idea to link it to retirement age? So that's exactly what we've done. And as the retirement age obviously rises, so will the age of that exemption.
Now, if we move on to dental charges, they're also going up. The three bands are increasing from £18.50 to £20.60, £50.50 to £56.30, and £219 to £244.30. But again, like prescriptions, they're lower than those charged in England. Again, we have had a problem in the past, and we seem to have a problem at the moment with contracting NHS dentists to carry out work. Are you charging enough there? Is there enough coming back into the department for you to be able to pay dentists enough to do the work at a reduced rate compared to the private rates?
I think what's important with any of these things is you don't go too far, too quick. And I think if we suddenly upped all the rates, yes, you might suddenly have a lot of people clambering for NHS work, but you've got to make sure that you are providing the right care in the right arena and that the charges aren't excessive. I think the charges, again, that we've come forward with are fair. I think they will deliver the service. I think with dentistry, it's more fundamental than just around charges, and I think we've had a chat about this in the past. It's about the way that funding is allocated via the units of dental treatment, and that's something that I've said before I'm very keen to look at, and the way that we engage with the providers of the service and the people who deliver it. And how they deliver it to their patients. I think that is the key to it, not necessarily around the charges. I think the charges that are in the scheme are fair, and I think they are at the right amount.
There is an argument to say that whatever the charges are, they're at a subsidised rate compared to that in the private sector. If you don't have enough dentists and people are on waiting lists and are not getting dental treatment, they're either going to suffer in silence without getting any treatment, or they're going to have to pay the private sector rates anyway. So no matter what your charges are set at, if you don't have enough dentists carrying out the work, people are going to be paying over those prices anyway.
A lack of dentists is not something unique to the Isle of Man. In terms of NHS dentistry, look across the water to England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, you find exactly the same situation. It's a general problem. And I think the only way we address that problem is by giving a better atmosphere for dentists to work in, probably a more robust contract that they understand more and they feel they have greater input into the service they're providing. Because I think at the moment, from speaking to various dentists, and as you can imagine, they've not been shy of coming forward and speaking to me, I think they get the feeling that they have some very good ideas about how to move the NHS service forward, but they're not always being listened to. And I think that is one of the key things, that we communicate with the service providers and we listen to their ideas and not necessarily follow the UK model. We've mentioned several times today what's happening in England, what's happening in Scotland. What I want to see is a model of what's happening in the Isle of Man and what can we do to move the Isle of Man service forward. And I think one of the important things is that we engage with the providers and come up with a system that works over here. Now, that's not going to be something we're going to be able to do overnight. If I could wave a magic wand and suddenly fix the problems and get the waiting lists for dental treatment down, I'd do it right now. But realistically, I can't. What we've got to do is move step by step, working with the providers to provide a service that meets the needs of those now and in the future. And I think the only way we are going to be able to do that is by engaging with those providers. And part of this, obviously, the charges have gone up, but that is one small step in the process.
Moving on to eye tests, the notion of charging for eye tests has been put to one side, but you are going to biennial ones, so once every 2 years rather than annual as they are at the moment. That, you say, is in line with the eye care strategy that's been published, which has been broadly welcomed by that sector. Do you see any opposition to it coming forth?
I think that there's always been people concerned that by moving to a biennial eye test of saying, well, what about those with potentially developing chronic conditions? Are they going to be missed? Is something going to be missed and something going to go tragically wrong for those individuals? That was a query I raised myself. Obviously, I'm no eye care specialist, so I had to ask the question. And the answer that I've got back is that the likelihood, it would be very unlikely for anything like that to happen, because you would expect people who have any form of deteriorating eyesight to be looking to go to the opticians anyway, and their general opticians would pick up on any problems and then refer them on anyway, outside of the biennial test.
And in terms of any medical procedures, are there any intentions to increase charges to residents?
At the moment, no. There's nothing on the table at the moment. I had a Twitter exchange with a couple of people the other day, and it was probably the shortest Twitter exchange I've ever had, where someone asked, is this a front for further charges down the line? And it most certainly isn't. The point of the Charter is to get into operation the National Health and Care Act of 2016 that requires a scheme to come forward before the Act can be properly activated. And I think one of the other things that seems to be being missed, because the big debate has been around prescription charges, charges for this, charges for that, charges for the other. The Charter itself is absolutely fundamental, because it's the first time really that the department has turned round and actually put into regulation what we say we will deliver and how we are going to deliver it as well. Now that's a very, very big change to how things were done before. It's, in many ways, it's a strategy within regulation. And it also provides, of course, for a proper independent complaints process as well, which I think in the past has been slightly lacking. And so, unfortunately, with everyone wanting to discuss what they see as the meaty issues about prescription charges and everything else, the Charter itself seems to have got a bit lost in the mix. So I think it's very important that we do also remember that what we're doing with the Charter is quite unique for us here on the island, and it is the department laying out what services and what standard of services it needs to provide to the people of the island.
It focuses on the responsibility of the public to look after themselves. You talk about well-being. To what degree are the public going to be left to their own devices to look after their own health?
Well, to be fair, that's one of the focuses. It's not the focus. We're not turning around with the Charter and saying, oh, well, you need to make sure you're okay and we're not really going to do anything. It's one of the focuses. What it's laying out is exactly what I've talked about several times, about moving from an illness service to being a wellbeing service. One thing I think we have done very well over the years is acting as an illness service, of waiting for someone to get ill and then turning around and saying, right, now we'll treat you. And we'll look after you and then pump you back out of the system. What we need to be doing is looking at helping people who have got the signs of becoming ill, early intervention, but we say that people have a duty as well to look after their own health and not do things that necessarily are going to put them into a situation where they're going to become chronically ill. But there's help and support available to help people with that. And one of the things the Charter is very, very keen on doing, and I think it's an absolutely wonderful document from this point of view, is it's looking at the entire individual. So we're not just talking about physical health here, we're also talking about mental health. And as far as I can recall, and if anyone can produce a document, otherwise I'd be amazed, because I've had a look and I can't find one. This is the first Isle of Man government document issued where it makes the link between physical health and mental health and doesn't box them off separately and say, well, that's physical health over there, that's mental health over there. They both interlinked within an individual. And I think that it's excellent the Charter recognises that and says it's the well-being of the whole individual. So there's 3 strands to it. There's physical health, there's mental health, and then there's your personal health. and taken responsibility for that.